All right, and we are on. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone watching from home or at work. My name is Diana Giselle. I am the engagement reporter covering community inequality with the Fresno Bees Media Lab, Fresnoland. I want to welcome you to today's Facebook Live. This is our Fresno Voices event. In a classic tale of two cities, Black and whites in Fresno live in different and unequal worlds. In their little corner of Fresno, Black residents lag behind other races in all spheres of life. This includes education, employment, economic participation, wealth, housing, health, and even life expectancy. This Fresno Voices Forum aims to bring people together with diverse experiences and involvement, including representation of government, neighborhood coalitions, health experts, educators, and business leaders to address these inequalities and explore solutions to racial disparity. We've gathered the questions for today's panel from different community members, leaders, and our readers. But we also want to welcome you, those watching from home, to ask questions in the comment section. Our hope is we're going to have time toward the end of this event to ask those questions. We're also going to be separating this into 3 segments. So we're going to have a health, education, and business segment in that order. So without further ado, we will go ahead and start with our health or medical segment. We have 2 panelists for this segment. We have Dr. Venice Curry. She is psychiatrist and activist for environmental and community issues. Hello, Dr. Venice.
Hello.
We also have Dr. Rochelle Thomas, psychologist with a practice in West Fresno. We are waiting for Dr. Thomas. Can you hear us, Dr. Thomas? Dr. Thomas, are you with us? Oh, we will give him a few seconds. Well, we can start with Dr. Curry. All right, we have some questions for you. The first one here is, what are the most important steps that should be taken at this time that we are in society to close the health gap that we see?
That's a great question. I think given that we're living with COVID right now, that the first step would be for us to take responsibility and really use self-discipline to keep ourselves safe. So that would mean wearing a mask if you're going out. It would mean social distancing if you have to be out. And it would be, paying attention to washing your hands. All of those really basic steps to just keep yourself from contracting COVID. We know that our vulnerabilities exist because we have so many of our family members that have pre-existing conditions. And so that makes it a little bit harder for them to keep safe. But initially, we want to be aware of what we're currently facing. And that would be the number one issue at this point.
Can you talk a little bit about just the overall health gap that we do see?
Sure. A lot of the work that I've been recently focused on is around infant mortality. And that is because infant mortality has always been a marker for the health and well-being of a community. And so when we talk about a community being healthy or not, we can look at infant mortality and see what are those factors that influence the health and birth outcomes for women. And so that includes really taking into account the environmental impact of the places that our women are living, the amount of exposure to air pollution, truck traffic, excessive truck traffic, the ability to get to stores where you can buy fresh fruit and vegetables, having recreational areas and a lot of green space. All of those are really the environmental structures that help promote healthy birth outcomes. And so part of the strategy with a lot of the work that is ongoing right now is really to address the environmental and built environment to make it more nurturing and to make it more likely that preconception health is better, that health during the pregnancy is better, and therefore the outcomes are also better. So it is really a multi-pronged approach to addressing not only the individual but the built environment that they are currently a part of.
You kind of spoke a little bit already on the just even access to healthy foods. This question actually came from one of our readers, and they say one of the biggest challenges to a health conscious lifestyle in communities of color is a lack of grocery stores and access to fresh food. What efforts need to be made to overcome the problem of what we call food deserts in places like Southwest Fresno?
That's a really great question, and a lot of communities very similar to West Fresno, similar to South Merced, have faced this across the nation. And this is not so much, this is an intentional situation actually, because if your area is not zoned appropriately, and if the city planners and the decision makers in terms of land use are making these decisions not to encourage, not to incentivize grocery stores to be in certain communities, it really goes back to the process of redlining and how you had some communities that were encouraged and invested in, and other communities that were really left and neglected. And so there was very much a lack of investment. And so you see this playing out in the health and welfare of the community. So one strategy is to really organize and really petition with your elected officials the importance of having access to a grocery store. That seems so very basic and really doesn't seem like a fight we should have to have. And yet it very much is. I mean, it took decades and a lot of work and a lot of different folks working together to actually get the one grocery store in West Fresno. It's very much an issue. And I encourage, communities to come together, but also there has to be some willingness on the part of elected officials and city planners to hear what the community is saying, and to know that, a community that doesn't have a grocery store is not a completed neighborhood.
So besides just the medical care and the access to food, can you think of any other resources that are needed to just improve the overall quality life of those communities of color?
Sure. So there's a combination of what makes a community complete or what makes complete. And so if you think about whether or not you have to drive out of your neighborhood in order to meet your needs. So if your neighborhood doesn't have basic shopping and amenities, that would need to be something included. If your neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks and is not well lit, if you're lacking in park space and green trees, all of these really help to combine for a neighborhood that is much more nurturing and provides a safer environment. And then around the people component, if you have stable jobs and stable housing, that again helps to solidify and to ground the community in those very basic abilities to take care of each other, and in turn take care and help the community grow. Part of this is really, it's a combination of the community working together, but there also is some responsibility that our city electeds are responsible for, because tax dollars come from West Fresno just as they come from other parts of the city. And so the idea that we are underinvesting in some places and overinvesting in other places is exactly what you see when you look at the lifespan between North and South Fresno. So we know what the outcome looks like. We know that it has to do with investment, and we know that it's intentional. And so how do you make that change? How do you make that switch? It's a number of different allies working together, but it certainly requires organization, and it also requires that there be some attentiveness to the economic and the health impacts of not investing in communities and just sort of leaving them to sort of continue to work for those basic amenities.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Curry. Hello, Dr. Rochelle Thomas. We have some questions for you too. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. So let's start with a little bit of a heavy question, but can you talk about why some people might reject the idea of systemic oppression?
I can absolutely talk about that. And that's a great question. I love this question. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist and I have a private practice, I see people from all walks of life. So I get to take in people's stories, help them make meaning of that. So I get to hear all different kinds of perspectives. And this issue has been coming up a lot. First of all, people really get triggered when they hear the word system or systemic, because they're like, there's no invisible hand that is oppressing people. And what does that even mean? So really, I mean, bare bones, basic level, a system is nothing more than a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or interconnecting network. That's all a system is. And not only do we live in larger level macro systems, we live in smaller level microsystems and mesosystems. So we even live in family systems. Everybody has a role to play, everybody. So we understand what a system is. And systemic issues, especially on the macro level, are really, really hard to deal with successfully because of that interconnectedness that's really involved and embedded in systems. So when you say, well, what's the issue? There are so many issues and a lot of them are overlapping. So when we come up with solutions, it's hard to come up with something that feels right for everyone because systemic level issues, and not those just concerning race, they impact all areas of our life. So people who really tend, in my experience, people who really tend to struggle with the idea of systemic oppression are people who are not necessarily racist. I mean, at the very least, we're all biased. And again, that's not just with race, but there are people who actually hold a worldview and a basic belief that life is fair. You get out of life what you put in. So people who are like, I've worked hard. I've worked hard for what I have. Nothing was handed to me. They're telling the truth. That has been their experience. But there are also people who their worldview is based on their experience where life isn't fair. And those are people who actually tend to be more resilient and they are more open to this idea of systemic level oppression. Lastly, what I want to say about this is historically, we've all participated in systems that have oppressed. And again, it is not just about race. This segment, series is about specifically how systemic level failures have impacted Black lives in Fresno. However, we have all experienced a breakdown in systems, be it macro level or micro level. Just a couple of examples. Family feuds that are passed on through generations, 20 years. You have cousins who've grown up apart. These are the kind of systemic level issues that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. Men in the child welfare system who don't get a fair shot at being able to raise their children. Vets who are seen as unfit to, after combat vets in particular, because there's a stigma against their mental health and their fitness for employment opportunities. So when we start to think about systemic oppression, if we can think about it more broadly than just race, something that rubs us the wrong way, then I think we can kind of start to buy into that because we've all experienced it. We see it every day.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Another question is, so many Black professionals, such as yourself, you had the chance to leave Fresno to get your education, come back, and you chose to, stay in Fresno. So can you talk about some of the positive things that Fresno does offer for Black residents, Black professionals, and why choose to call it home? Why did you choose to call it home?
First of all, I chose to call it home because my family's still here. And I generally tell people, you take yourself with you wherever you go. So, and you are going to find problems wherever you go. I think a lot of Black professionals come back to Fresno because it is a tight-knit community, for better and for worse. But if you can find your niche and find opportunity, Fresno is a very fast-growing community. When I went away to grad school in 2010 and came back 5 years later, I didn't recognize some parts of town. So with the rapid, steady growth of Fresno, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think Black folk are some of the most innovative and resourceful, creative thinking beings that that we have in this community and just, you know, worldwide. So I think because of that, we can really, really find opportunities for growth. I think that's number one of the most positive things about Fresno.
So a little, I guess, a little piggybacking on that is, what advice would you give to young people who are maybe getting frustrated because of the disparities in Fresno with employment, housing, and income? You know, what can they hold on to keep them thriving?
Again, find opportunities. Where there's a will, there's a way. I've shared in interviews before, when I first came back as a doctor, I was only making $15 an hour, couldn't pay for rent. I was swimming in debt. But I had a really supportive community around me that believed in a vision that I had before I even had the means to complete it. So you need a support system, number one. Number two, you've got to learn how to work with all kinds of people. We are not in, we don't, the reality is our numbers are very low here. Our numbers are extremely low here. So there's no like geographic, like Black community, as it were. So we need to learn to be able to work across the aisle. Some of my biggest supporters have been non-Black folk. And they've been able to really support me and give me opportunities. So that support network. And then also making sure that you don't isolate yourself from dissenting opinions. Sure, you need to know when it's getting toxic and when to cut it off, but young folk need to learn to have fruitful dialogue, open, honest dialogue, where it's not so polarizing, where there's space for people to listen to each other's story and find some common ground. Because I don't think anybody wakes up one morning, very few people wake up one morning and say, you know what, I think my life's mission today is going to be to oppress somebody. We can find a lot of common ground when we learn how to talk with each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Curry. We are going to move on now to the education segment. So for this segment, we have three panelists. We have Angie Barfield, Program Specialist at Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. Hello, Angie. We also have Abigail Akande. Abigail is a Buchanan High School senior class of 2020. And we have Dr. Catherine Catania, Deputy Superintendent of Educational Services for Fresno County Office of Education. All right, so let's go ahead and start with Angie.
Hi there.
Angie, so a key part of your work for the Office of Superintendent of Fresno Schools is supporting those parents with school-age children who have limited resources. What are some of the biggest challenges and areas of opportunity that you see to engage and support those parents?
Well, I can say COVID has definitely raised the shade on what's necessary and needed in our communities. I definitely can say, working for and with Superintendent Uvino and Deputy Superintendent Catania, we make it our life's work to find those things and find those resources to connect. But in connecting, we find that we must educate our communities on how to really engage and be a part of it without feeling intimidated or marginalized in the space. So right now, you know, it's about internet. It's about having Wi-Fi, just different things, little things that we take for granted that are of grave importance for our children to learn in our communities. So it could be anything at any given moment. I mean, we're in the middle of the worst fires that our state and country have seen in a long time. And now we're seeing our families that are without homes. Just simple things. So I think it's just important to educate on resources, keep it right in the forefront of what's necessary so that we are sharing information fairly.
So you're involved with recruiting and motivating other African Americans to go into the field of education. Can you describe who qualifies and the process that candidates need to go through to become teachers? Like, how would it ultimately change the classroom experience for African American students?
If I can defer that question to Deputy Superintendent Catania, because she would know that a much vast, she has a wealth of knowledge on that. So Dr. Catania?
In the recruiting process, it was very important to Superintendent Jovino when he was sworn in as the county superintendent about bringing the African American voice more to the forefront in our community. You might know he grew up out on the west side, out on Kearney Boulevard. And so he saw firsthand as he was growing up and going through his career in education, the folks that were there and the ones that weren't there. So it became a priority to begin to look at pipelines for teacher recruitment, particularly for students of color. Because we know that if students see their teachers and their mentors with the same ethnicity that represents them, then they can envision that vision of how they could become that position as a teacher, as an administrator, as a superintendent. So in the very early days when Superintendent Jovino became the county superintendent, he started 4 different programs. And one of them was the African American Superintendent's Cabinet to talk to students from all across the high schools in our area, and particularly talk to them about one of the topics was what could be done about the lack of African American educators in the teaching field, principal and superintendent field in our area. And so the students came up with ideas. They met with the district superintendents, and so teacher pipelines were created. But most interestingly, I think of the first 42 students when they were first asked, well, how many of you, and these are kids in high school, so they're starting to think about it. So when they were asked, well, how many of you are planning on going into education? There was not one hand raised.
That's right.
So we had to talk about, why is it important if you really feel called to help your community and you like to help others learn, then you really should consider education as a career. So part of it is we have to market what are the good things about becoming an educator. And when you look at it on a per hour basis compared with some other fields, it is certainly you can make a good living here in the Fresno community as an educator. And some people like the lifestyle of the hours with a few weeks off for the summer, although most educators are engaged in continuing education or projects with students during the summer. But it's of vital importance that we recruit students of color to go through those pipelines. Fresno Unified currently has a pipeline where they have particularly recruited students of color, and they will mentor them through as in their high school years, then on through their college years, and then on through their teaching credential, and help them be student teachers. So it's very important that we nurture that pipeline in all careers, but especially in education.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Catania. Abigail, I do have a question. This one came from our president of Fresno City College, Carol Goldsmith. So she asked, how do you feel about if the California Community College adopted a graduation requirement similar to what we see in CSUs that focuses on cultural competency, social justice, ethnic studies, and equity?
I think that would be amazing. One thing that we discussed a lot in the superintendent's cabinet was just the students want to see themselves in the curriculum. They want to see themselves in teachers. They want to see themselves in the staff. So when we're learning about our history, we're just more likely to be engaged and to be excited about it. And I think that would be a great step into helping students realize that they just have more potential. When you open a history textbook and you don't see yourself, it's hard to imagine yourself in positions of power or becoming somebody who could make a difference. But when you see yourself and you learn your history and you become more equipped to realize your potential. So I think that would be amazing. And I think that they would see a real increase in students who are willing to take those classes, and just an increase in just knowledge overall.
Thank you. And Angie, I did want to ask, we had one question that came in. How can Fresno County educational leaders ensure that curriculum provides what children need, same for, cultural competency and to learn to respect other cultures and races?
So I can say that Superintendent Uvino, after hearing the students, not just in our cabinet, but also in our Ujima Servant Leadership Academy, he actually initiated work on developing a curriculum that is African-centered, that does not start at slavery, that it goes back to our origins and begins the teaching process from there. So sometimes it takes courageous leadership in order to step into these roles, to just accept the fact that we don't have the whole story, right? And for African-American students and even other students, it is important to know the whole story so that you can make logical decisions and perspectives of people. And when you put out this inconsistent story about an entire race of people that all they were slaves and all these other things, it convolutes the way that they think about those people. But all, what we have started the work in doing is showing our African American students that you are more than what came over on the people that were enslaved and stolen from the continent, from the motherland, right? That contributed to the well-being of America. They were the most brilliant people on the planet. So when you take that concept and you think about it, you kind of go, wow, as opposed to, oh. So, when you have students like Abby that are now away at college and doing the work and wanting to see change happens, it has to start with truth. So curriculum must be it has to be reestablished. It needs to be recreated, and it needs to include the whole truth about all races and all groups of people, so that we can begin to build community in an authentic way.
Thank you. And Abigail, I want to make sure I do ask this question. You wrote an open letter to Clovis Unified School District, which you just graduated, about racism and in the educational system. Describe what it felt like to be a student and what, in that environment, and what prompted you to write the letter to the superintendent.
So I truly, I love my district, and I just want to make that point unclear. But as a Black student, the things that we encountered on a daily basis, like microaggressions and treatment from certain staff and teachers, just throughout my entire educational career in Clovis Unified, was just not conducive to being proud of who I was. And luckily for me, in high school, I was able to join my ASU and meet with Barfield and Superintendent Jovino and just learn a little bit more on how to advocate for ourselves. But basically, it was a long period of being promised change, and change wasn't really occurring. And while I was able to be behind the scenes and see the steps that were being taken to make that change happen, it's not enough to just make promises, and it's not enough to just say we're working on it. Eventually, you're going to need to see results, and because those results were not they just weren't happening. So I just had to say something about it, because if we just keep silent and we don't call out the things that the racist students that were just being continually it was just let it go, let's brush it under. It's not okay. And for students to really thrive in an educational environment, they need to feel like they are equal to other students, and they need to feel like their opinions, their voices, and who they are matters.
Thank you. Thank you. What a great segment. We have to move on to the next segment. We are now going to get into the business segment. Our panelists here, we also have three. We have Tara Lynn Gray, who is the CEO of the Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce. We have Wendell Pascasio. He's an electrical contractor and president of Imperial Electric Service. And we have Jerry Dyer, Fresno's mayor-elect. Welcome, everyone. We are going to start with Ms. Gray here. Can you hear me okay?
I can, indeed.
All right, so our first question is, in what ways can the city of Fresno help Black-owned businesses?
Wow. So there's a lot that the city of Fresno can do. And let me say, before I go into any specifics, that I think that the city of Fresno is no different than many other cities in our state that are struggling to do better by Black businesses, which is what we need across the board. And some of the areas I think that we could start is public contracting, having better public works, outreach and education, making sure that information is available to not only small businesses, but the organizations that advocate for small businesses when opportunities do arise. I've often said that people do business with the people that they know and trust. And if someone doesn't know you, they're not apt to discuss an opportunity with you or to give you any inside information. And I don't mean bad inside information. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean to discuss projects and ideas and things that are coming up. The conversation that so many of us don't have the social networks to be a part of.
So what would you tell Black business owners who maybe are struggling with succeeding here in Fresno?
I would say that you have got to network. You have got to join organizations like mine that are going to advocate on your behalf. You've got to do your homework. You've got to be prepared. It's not enough to be Black and a business owner. You still have to have a real business. You have to follow policies and procedures. You have to be able to convince those that are considering to do business with you that you are not a risk. A lot of times we lose out on opportunities because we don't have the right risk profile. And rightly so, agencies, and the city of Fresno is no different. They need to mitigate risk. And they need to make sure that when they do business with somebody, that it's not going to come back to bite them. And so we've got to make our small businesses ready. We've got to get them prepared, proper insurances, proper legal certifications. I mean, the list is quite long.
Yeah. So what do you think is the path forward to change the lending practices of the banking loan industry, specifically in Southwest Fresno?
I just talked about risk, and unfortunately, doing business with Black people has been in the risk category for most banks from as far back as we know. And their historical practices of redlining, et cetera, have been problematic for us. I think we need, first of all, a presence of banks in Southwest Fresno. You mentioned that neighborhood in specific. There's not a banking presence there. And so banks have got to realize that Black people, individuals, Black business owners are customers worthy of having. And I think in general, business has to move from a transactional nature with Black people to a relational nature. We have to be seen as valuable and treated as such.
Thank you. Wendell, this question is for you. How have you been able to overcome obstacles to become a successful electrical contractor? What's helped you through your business journey?
Well, thank you. Definitely, Turley and Gray and the Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce have definitely helped us over the last couple of years to be where we're at today. They've really helped us, putting us in the front line of a lot of these state or government organizations, where we would have had a hard time getting in front of these on our own without the support of the chamber. Like Southern California Edison, PG&E, and the zero emission that we've been working on for the last 2 years. Because of the chamber, we were able to get get in front of those people to bid these projects. If we would have done it on our own, it's very hard, because we, as the only Black-owned electrical contractor in Fresno, which is pretty sad, because when you go to Southern California and Northern California, there are more. So it becomes a little more competitive for us to try to put ourselves with some of the general contractors that will take our bids and allow us the chance. They're using the same contractors over and over for a lot of these projects, and it's harder for us to get in and get our foot in the door.
So in your experience as a businessman, what do you think needs to happen so that especially, minority entrepreneurs just have a fair chance?
They definitely need to have more DBE regulations. So they are DBE regulations that they're putting out for bid. Like City of Fresno has some, the State Center Community College have had a couple, Caltrans, they have some, but some of them are only good faith effort. The good faith effort is making a phone call to a DBE or a minority contractor and they did their part. That's really it. They're not really putting that extra effort into really saying, hey, we want to work with you. We're a bigger organization. Let us mentor you through this process. Unfortunately, when it's only good faith, it's really that's as far as it goes, a phone call or a lunch or something. So they did their part. They did their requirements.
Do you see in your experience that there are young Black entrepreneurs that want to branch out in business, or do you think that they're not even mingling with that?
So in the construction industry, and in African American in the construction industry, it's harder, right? Because they've been mentally enslaved in their mind that African Americans aren't for construction. Honestly, that's where we're at with it. Because I have 19 employees and I only have 4 African American employees, and that's a bad ratio. That's not really a good ratio to have, because there's not the education out there for trade schools. There's not a lot of resources out there for trade school. I went to a trade school. I went to the Western Electrical Contractors Association, and I believe there's not everyone can afford the college, right? So, but you can have a good life and a good education and own your own businesses if you go through some trade schools. So I believe that's where we really lack is trade schools.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Dyer, this one is for you. This was asked by Dr. Ronald Herms, and he wants to know what is being done to evaluate the Fresno Police Department's record on treatment of Black residents.
Well, I think it deviates a little bit from, the business side of what we're talking about. But I can tell you there is a commission on police reform that has been established, looking at policies, looking at practices, looking at training, and a number of other things. And they're going to be providing recommendations here. I believe it's going to be the end of October. That is being chaired by Oliver Baines. And so I look forward to those recommendations and seeing what policy changes we can make, and doing some of the things that obviously folks in the community feel need to be changed. So, and that could be everything from philosophy to, again, training to everything that we or has been done in the Fresno Police Department.
What role can the government play in improving the lives of Black people in Fresno, and even as we talked about, young Black entrepreneurs and just businesses that may be struggling right now too through the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. We know for a fact that the pandemic, COVID-19, has impacted people of color more than any others. We also know that when you look at our history in Fresno, and it's similar to what's occurred across America, there have been intentional efforts to do things that created segregation, intentional efforts that through redlining that limited where Black people could live, through covenants, which specifically included in any type of real estate transaction, that if a white person sold their residence in a particular area, they could not sell it to a African American. We also know that there's been targeted industry placed into Southwest Fresno based on zoning laws. And so my belief is that just as intentional as all those things have been in creating that segregation and a lack of opportunity for African Americans, we have to be equally intentional today of tearing down those walls. That means creating policies and systems that increase opportunities for African Americans to open up their own business, to develop workforce of African Americans, to target industries that come to Fresno that are a good fit for Fresno, that's going to pay livable wage jobs, just not opportunity jobs, but good paying jobs, high skilled jobs. It's not enough for us to just simply measure how many jobs are being provided or what the tax revenue is going to be as a result of those industries we recruit, but who they're hiring. Are they hiring the right people, African Americans, people of color? Are they hiring those people who are underrepresented? Are they hiring from the right zip codes for those people who lived in the disenfranchised neighborhoods? And are they hiring people for the right pay? All of those things have to be measured if we're going to be successful. And again, that requires us first and foremost to recruit the right businesses and the right industries. I also believe that it's important for us to ensure we have a skilled workforce here. And working with some of our trade schools, our career tech, Fresno City College, Fresno County Office of Education, Fresno Unified School District, to make sure that we are developing our workforce so that we can get people into that workforce, and then eventually perhaps they can establish their own business.
So do you have those plans on your agenda when you take office? And where does it fall on your priority list to begin to do that work?
Well, the number one priority that I have as the mayor of this city is to address poverty. And we know that poverty is real. And we also know that it has a disparate impact. We know that poverty impacts African Americans at really 3 times the rate it does whites. We also know that they are 2.5 times, Black folks are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed. So it has to be very intentional on our part. I do have economic mobility council that is being developed that will be very inclusive, and it's for the purpose of outlining strategies that's going to allow us to become more business friendly in Fresno, so that we can attract the right businesses. It's also going to allow us, as I said earlier, to make sure that we're getting people of color hired and into the workforce at good paying livable wage jobs.
Thank you. This is a question that really any one of you can choose to answer, but what is a policy change that you think the city of Fresno should make to help empower Black businesses? Would anyone like to take this one on?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that was just said was, you can have a policy in place that gives the appearance that you're creating shared opportunities for Black business owners. But it has to be real. And I can commit to you that it will be real in Fresno. The policies that we create the opportunities that we create for folks who are in poverty, folks who are of color, is going to be real. We're not going to go through the motions. And I can make that commitment and that promise to you today.
And if I may just follow up on that, I think what's difficult about policy and rulemaking is oftentimes there are unintended consequences. For example, project labor agreements are used oftentimes in major construction projects, and lots of times those agreements have unintended consequences, even when they have community benefit agreements and they have carve-outs. The practicality of utilizing those carve-outs and creating the benefit for the community never really happens because it wasn't practical to carry it out as it was written. So back to something that Wendell said, is that oftentimes in dealing with DBEs, there's a good faith effort, but in the end, the real outcomes were not there. And so as Mayor-elect Dyer just said, that he will have measurements in place, I really think that that's a place we could start with policy, is that we are going to count, we are going to measure, and we are going to monitor whether or not existing policies we have are even bearing the fruit that they were intended to bear when they were created, before we go about creating additional policies and additional things to monitor. Let's check and see whether or not the existing DBE policy that we have is 49 CFR Part 23 being carried out at the airport. Are there the appropriate number of DBEs there? Are they meeting their goals, and are they quality contracts? And then we can go through every department in every place, and we can actually count, we can measure, and we can determine whether or not those things are working now before we start to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you. And I believe we have Dr. Catania that also wanted to chime in on strategic policies to push. Welcome.
I just want to thank you. I just wanted to add the comment because the question was raised about where do we think the most strategic areas are right now to push on. And I think it's up to every one of us as leaders in our segment. You could hear Dr. Curry and Dr. Thomas. They are well versed in the health field, and our business leaders and the mayor to be in the organization and the business field. And I think it's really up to each one of us, just like Mayor-elect Dyer, I'm trying to use the right term, Mayor-elect Dyer said, is we need to see real action, just not talk about it. So I think in whatever segment you're in, you really need to take a second look at, is there real action that's happening? And those community voices need to step up as well. And just a quick example, so Dr. Curry alerted to, we had 3 years ago, tied for the world's highest preterm birth rate and Black infant mortality rate in the world. And we're supposed to be a first world country. That's just unacceptable. And one of the things that we found was that when African American ladies went for their first prenatal visit, they were treated so rudely and so culturally inappropriate, they just never went back again. So then if there was a problem with the pregnancy, it exacerbated, and they delivered early, and then that brings on a whole host of then health problems for the child and things. So needless to say, as an education community, the best thing we're looking for is a healthy baby to be born. So a task force was formed. One of the things that we found was there's very few African American nurses and healthcare workers in our area. So that's one area. Even though we're education, I'm interested in what's the pipeline for healthcare. And in fact, City College has just convened, it's going for 2 months now, a task force on why out of I think it's 300 nurses that have been in the RN program. There's something like only 11 that were African American. Well, why is that? Because we know there's more African American students that were qualified to enter that program. So I think all of us have to step up wherever we interact and say, what is the real change? And be the voice of discontent and say, you know, that's not acceptable to have so few African Americans in nursing programs at Fresno State, at City College, at wherever, when we're trying to solve that problem of better health, better education, better job opportunities. We have to step up and be uncomfortable and just say, you know what, that's not right.
Yeah, and I wanted to add something, if I could, Diana, to that, because you know, we know what professions are out there that are lacking. The ones that have a greater demand but less of a supply in management, information services, the tech services, the healthcare, as we just mentioned, transportation, utilities, and those are all good paying, high skilled jobs. You know, what we haven't talked about is what's getting ready to happen in West Fresno with the transformative climate communities dollars that have been provided to Fresno. There's going to be about $170+ million committed. We know that Fresno City College is developing a trade school in West Fresno. It is going to have the largest automotive workshop west of the Mississippi. Those are going to be high skilled jobs that we're going to be able to provide to our students. And it makes sense to me as the incoming mayor to make sure that we're very intentional about recruiting those types of businesses to Fresno that can take advantage of that workforce, that skilled workforce that we're providing. And again, we want to have good metrics in place to measure who is being hired for those jobs. I also saw another comment come up about what's happening in perhaps the Bay Area with after COVID-19. There's a lot of businesses that are considering creating hubs. Fresno is really poised to have these hubs, these second offices. I know Drive and Economic Development Corporation are working on what's called second office. That means creating second offices for the tech industry. We need to be prepared for that and ensuring that we are upskilling a workforce that will be able to work in those technology hubs. And yes, we should be targeting people of color, African Americans, and making sure that they have the skill set to be employed in those hubs right here in our city. I firmly believe that Fresno is poised to come out of the COVID crisis better than any other city in California. We are centrally located, 40 million people that surround us. We have freeway access. We have a workforce, unfortunately, a high unemployment workforce that is ready to be trained and ready to be put to work. And we just need to make sure that that happens collectively. And I'm glad to be a part of that effort.
Thank you. I want to go ahead and invite Dr. Curry and Dr. Thomas also to join us here. If you want to add.
Yeah, I want to just remind ourselves that structural racism is not something that just a few people or institutions choose to practice. It really is embedded into the culture of America. It was true of the past. It is true of the present. And so all of the work that has to go on collectively really has to be intentional. And so the opportunities exist locally and state and federal. Yes, they do. And at the grassroots level, where you have communities that have been working on, for instance, infant mortality and trying to improve the neighborhoods. That is ongoing work that really starts at the grassroots with neighbors saying, I need my community to be more supportive and I want my elected officials to be more attentive to what I'm needing. But I also want to call attention to the fact that this structural racism really does impact every single area that we've just outlined. And so with the educational needs, with the healthcare needs, there always has to be this intention of I'm going to attack the root cause. Otherwise, we're really just fiddling around the edges. And so the idea that we know we have a healthcare and a doctor shortage, why are the pipeline that I'm currently working on with the Dawn Initiative is really to address that. It's a maternal child health workforce. It's physicians and CMTs and nurses to address the fact that our community needs competent care from people who absolutely are invested in our care. And so that really looks like a pipeline that's being built. It is a multifaceted approach. It's multidisciplinary, but it does require that we absolutely have the blinders off and that we're actually really talking clearly about what the obstacles have been and what the challenges currently are. And so the collection of people that are working around infant mortality include educational institutions like UCSF. It includes the Department of Public Health. It includes other community organizations that are working. It includes educational opportunities, because part of what changes our educational opportunities is the tax base. And if the tax base in West Fresno is different than other places, and the investment in our schools is significantly different, it isn't the students are not capable and not performing. It's that there are all these other issues that are stacked against them. And so when we talk about, just like we talk about improving healthcare for individuals, we're still looking at the educational system in terms of the overall environment. And that overall environment really has to do with a structure and an institutional setup that perpetuates a certain practice that you see in business and you see in all of these other disciplines. So I really think that it's important for us to recognize and to acknowledge that that is the reality that we're living in. That is the real fight that we are actually doing battle. And I'm happy to hear that, you know, obviously this impacts police and the way that police come into the space as well. And so all of these issues have to be attacked with some intention of deconstructing racism in the individual practice and in the individual institution. And that is how you change the structure. And that is how you get to structural change that provides an equitable playing field for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Curry. Dr. Thomas, did you want to wrap it up for us with the comment? You're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm here. In terms of the question was, you know, how do we reverse health disparities? At the very top of my segment, I talked about how different parts of systems all work together. So there isn't, and I think Dr. Curry very wisely stated, you have to intervene at all levels. And I think one of the main areas that we can start is in terms of access to capital. So we can invest in communities of color, not just to have them be skilled employees, but also business owners. So we can create job opportunities. We have one Black electrical contractor here. And like he said, that's just not enough. I am one of very few Black-owned psychologists, private practices. I'm hoping to expand, but I don't have access to capital. And what we do know is people hire who they know. But if I'm not in a position to hire or expand, somebody goes without. And what we do know is when people are able to work, when people have opportunity, their health outcomes increase very significantly. So if we have infrastructure, if we have ownership, not just someone else coming into our community and giving us jobs, but if we can grow our own businesses and have access to that, we will be better off, especially health-wise.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh. May I just add to that and say that the power for Black people, the health of Black people is in Black hands. And until we have access to capital, whether it's in the form of grants, contracts, I'm talking about for Black-led, Black-run organizations, and that goes for Black businesses as well, we will still be a long way from the right kind of solutions for us. When you think about the fact that 5% of college graduates come from HBCUs, yet they make up more than 50% of our professional doctors and engineers and those that end up in the highest wage earning or professional type of corporations, you can see that there is something that happens at an HBCU that doesn't happen for us at a PWI. And the same thing is true for Black employees. Black businesses are the largest employer in front of Walmart and McDonald's for Black people. So self-efficacy is a very, very significant part of coming to the solutions that will help raise Black voices and Black lives in the Central Valley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This wraps up this Fresno Voices Forum. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists. I think this was a progressive and engaging conversation. And I want to invite you all, the viewers, to follow us and stay connected on all of our socials. We're all at Fresnoland on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can also sign up for our newsletter and support local journalism. Our work is not possible without the support from our generous donors. And if you haven't already, please take time to read the series of stories inspired by this Fresno Voices project at fresnob.com/Fresno-Voices. My name is Diana Giselle. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.